Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and being here this afternoon for our next panel for this symposium marking the 50th anniversary of the Walpole takeover. This panel, Blurring the Prison Wall, John Boone, the NPRA and Abolition, is going to be moderated by DeAnza Cook, who is a Ph.D. candidate in the history department here at Harvard. And DeAnza will be introducing our panelists in just a moment. And also, I wanted to take a moment to let everyone know, in addition to please grabbing a free copy of Jamie Bissonnette's When the Prisoners Ran Walpole from the front desk before you go. There is also Abolition collaboratory swag that is available for folks to take for free as well. So that's also on that table. So please do grab something that fits. So without further ado, I'll pass things over to DeAnza Cook.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Folks hear me through this mic here? Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are honored to have with us today our esteemed panelists, Bobby Dellelo, Jim Isenberg, Judge Paul Chernoff, and Dr. Tony Vandermeer. Bobby Dellelo was the first president of the National Prisoners Reform Association, or NPRA for short, serving alongside Vice President Ralph Ham. Raised in Boston, he survived incarceration as a child in the notorious Lyman School for Boys. Bobby was a renowned leader within the Massachusetts state prison system during his 40 years of incarceration. And in 2003, Bobby's conviction was overturned and his life without parole sentence was vacated, and he has continued to organize and fight for those behind the walls since coming home. Jim Isenberg is the co-founder of Grandpas United, an intergenerational organization that provides youth mentoring and community service in White Plains, New York. Jim is also the retired executive director of the North American Family Institute. Jim has extensive experience in conflict management, youth services, corrections, law enforcement, and transportation. He created the Youth Police Initiative, which has been implemented nationally as well as internationally. And Jim also has a Ph.D. from UC Berkeley and is the author of the book, Police Leadership in a Democracy, a conversation with America's police chiefs. Honorable Paul Chernoff is a retired Associate Justice of the Massachusetts Superior Court. He currently teaches trial practice at Boston College Law School, and he is a pro bono judicial mediator for civil cases in the Massachusetts Superior Court, as well as a pro bono attorney representing disabled veterans at the Veterans Legal Services Legal Clinic. In 1973, when John Boone was Massachusetts Commissioner of Corrections, Judge Chernoff was chair of the Massachusetts Parole Board, and prior to that, he worked as a public defender in Washington, D.C., and was a commissioned officer in the Naval Corps from 1961 to 1964. And last but not least, Dr. Tony Vandermeer is a community activist, organizer, and teacher. Tony has served as president of the Boston Black Political Task Force and the Boston Pan-African Forum. He has also served as a local advisor to the Boston Black Lives Matter movement. Tony is currently a senior lecturer in Africana Studies Department at UMass-Boston. He was an African American Studies major at Northeastern, and he received his master's degree in community economic development from the Graduate School of Business at New Hampshire College, as well as an MA and a PhD in leadership and change from Antioch University. As you all can see from their accomplished bios, we have amazing panelists with here today to share with us their experiences, and we can't thank you enough for your presence. So for the first 30 minutes of our discussion, we're going to focus on a few prepared questions for each of the panelists. And then for the remainder of our time, we'll open things up for questions. So please don't be shy, our wonderful audience members, and we are eager to hear from you during Q&A. So we have three major topics for discussion. The first is the National Prisoner Reform Association, or the NPRA, which you heard about last night, Commissioner John O. Boone, who was the first Black commissioner of the Massachusetts Corrections Department in 1973. And last but not least, we're going to talk about a crucially important topic in the age of mass incarceration, and that is prison abolition. And just so everyone is clear about what we mean when we say prison abolition, abolitionists today define prison abolition as a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. I'll read that one more time. Abolition is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. Like everyone in this room and on Zoom, we are not all here at this table, self-proclaimed prison abolitionists, but for the purposes of discussion today, that's okay. Our shared mission is to speak truth about history and shine light on lessons from the legacy of the Walpole prison takeover, and I have faith that we can accomplish that today. So let's kick off with that first topic, the National Prisoners Reform Association. And the first question is for Bobby. We've learned a little bit already from last night's documentary about your role as a founding member in the NPRA at Walpole in 1973. So could you tell us a little bit more, Bobby, about the NPRA and why it was founded? What was the NPRA's primary mission?
Primary mission was to close prisons. It's hard to explain to citizens a situation that resembles insanity. Like I said last night, they take drug dealers and drug addicts and put them in the same cell block, and then they wonder why people are dying from overdosing. Walpole is a crazy place. I have to go back in there to come out and speak with you, and that's a tough thing. Watching 3,000 years in life, what a rush of memories that were overwhelming me. I was the chairman of the inmate council, and Boone came on the scene, and we took a vote of the entire prison population, and 96% of the population voted for NPRA. When they did that, I canceled the Inmate Advisory Council. I wouldn't take that job unless I had the power. Administration would take an individual and give them drugs and do other unbelievable things. Wow, all that's coming rushing back. It came together kind of nice. Boone came on the scene. Well, let me back up a little bit. The guards in Walpole were serious racists. I mean, it was really bad. And they controlled the black population by only putting a small amount in each block. They wouldn't put a large group of blacks in one block because they didn't want them to build a power base. Situations were serious. I mean, there was a lot of racial stuff until like Boone came on the scene and the guards went out on strike. When the guards went out, what that was about was they were looking for a bloodbath, blame Boone and throw him out. They used to carry cards at KKK. I mean, it was a real insane asylum. I used to be able to take it just so much and then I'd have to escape just to save my mind. I got them 3 times and a bunch of almosts. But NPRA seemed to be like a great idea, and the main thing that we wanted to do with it was to create a union. And it looked like we were going to get the union. And the reason we were pushing so hard on that was because as a union, we could challenge the guards union and pull their unification away from them. We could force them to behave themselves. It was notorious. Child molesters and whatnot, I really don't care about those kind of people. I like children, and I can't stand somebody that hurts a child. However, I don't agree that it's okay for guards to beat up these individuals because nobody will cover their back. And the guards started getting a little ballsy, to say the best, right? And I had told outside people that, come up, that they're going up the ladder and they're coming toward our people. And when they beat up one of our guys, we're going out into the corridor with knives and stab the shit out of them. Everybody panicked. Because, our crew was the hardcore of the prison system. And they knew if we said that is what would happen. We did the vote, which was amazing. I'll explain it without taking 3 days. What happened is they go to one cell block, bring everybody out. You see in the dining room, in the picture, the metal tables and stuff. Well, we had the tables set up with shoe boxes, taped, we're gonna tape them shut. And one block at a time would come in, like the boxes would be over here. You'd come in, pick up a paper, pick up a pencil, and vote who you wanted. And put it in the box. And everybody saw this. There were 5 guard representatives, there were 5 prisoner representatives, and there were 5 representatives from the Department of Corrections, to make sure everything was up and up. Every prisoner in that prison system, even guys who were in segregation, got to vote. And like I said, 96% of the population voted for the NPRA to represent them. And as soon as that happened, I abolished the inmate council. I wouldn't take the job unless I got the power to wipe out the, excuse me, to wipe out the advisory committee. It's got all kinds of good names to it. I just lost a train of thought. Getting too old, guys.
Oh, that was great. Thank you for getting us started. I want to jump in and bring in Jim to this conversation because, Bobby, you mentioned at the top that the primary mission of the NPRA was to close the prison. You told us a lot last night after the documentary about the abuse and the violence that was happening in the DOC. You spoke just briefly about how the guards were, wreaking havoc on the folks who were incarcerated at Walpole. But Jim, you were kind of working on the other side of this as a prison reformer, as part of the Massachusetts Department of Health and Human Services during the takeover. So could you shed some light for the audience members on what visions for prison reform were on the table at this time? And from your position, what were some of the biggest challenges with respect to prison reform in Walpole?
Thank you, DeAnza. Thanks, Bobby. I just want to say I live in New York now, and I've been here since yesterday. I haven't been back up here in quite a while, and I really want to thank Thomas and Jamie and Bobby and Ralph and everyone for putting on this event. It's been quite memorable, having lived through this 50 years ago, and the opportunity to see colleagues and hear the just invaluable stories that have been shared over the last day, and seeing so many people in the audience who obviously care about what happened and what should happen going forward. For me, I came to Boston. I'm originally, you'll excuse me, I'm a Berkeley guy. And I studied criminology at Berkeley in the 60s. Berkeley had a school that Ronald Reagan closed for being too radical. And I was exposed to the issues of prison reform, both in California with people, if you don't know Delancey Street, Mimi Silbert, who's run programs out there in California for many, many years. Actually, Delancey Street came to Walpole for 3 days when we were in the midst of one kind of strike. And I also was fortunate before I was brought to Massachusetts. I studied in Oslo, Norway, with two really incredible people, Niels Christie and Thomas Mathisen, who were, this is 1970, 71, who were talking about issues around abolishing prisons and about what rehabilitation really was about. And one of the things I learned from them is that I wasn't going to waste my time getting better shoes and socks, no offense to prisoners, but really how to keep people out of prison and how to get people who are in prison out. So I came to Massachusetts. My first day on the job was the day after Attica. And my first week, I went to every prison in Massachusetts with the Lieutenant Governor Donald Dwight, and everything went into lockdown because people were frightened. Prisoners were frightened, the guards were frightened, everyone was frightened because Attica was completely out of control. And in the midst of meeting with prisoners and with correction officers and others with then Commissioner Jack Fitzpatrick, sadly on an afternoon like today, he had a heart attack sitting next to me and fell on the floor. Fortunately, he lived, but he was done. And I was then sent on a secret trip to find a new commissioner of corrections for Massachusetts. When I was a student at criminology at Berkeley, I worked at San Quentin in the counseling center. I have a lot of experience. If you were a 288, that was a problem. That was a child issue. I worked with a lot of jazz musicians. I sat in on the parole board every month. So I talked to a guy I knew in California, and he told me John Boone was a warden in Lorton, and he was a man who he felt I should go see and talk to about being corrections commissioner. I went down on the way, I went and interviewed a guy from Holmesburg Prison. This is 1971. His claim to fame is that he had a computer and he had data. And there were 500 kids in the dining hall. Every kid was black, and he was doing nothing other than he had data and a computer. So he was the first person I interviewed. I then went to Lorton Prison where John Boone was. And I sat in on a staff meeting with John. This is 1971. Don't forget the Vietnam War has gone on, civil rights movement, everything that was going on in this country, including this morning, people talking about Louise Day Hicks here in Boston. And there were white guys and black guys who were on the staff, and everybody respected John, and he had a staff meeting, and then I walked in the prison with him, just the two of us. And he walked through the prison, and people, I just never forget, all the men would, Mr. Boone, how are you, Mr. Boone? He was respectful, and they were respectful. And he had the first program going where guys in Lorton were going to community colleges. And of course, Paul was then a public defender there, so he knew a lot about it. John was doing things that hadn't been done anywhere in terms of beginning community corrections. And I came back, and I want to say I worked for Peter Goldmark, the Secretary of Human Services. Human Services was just created at the state. Peter was 30 years old, I was 26. He had prisons, youth services, parole, mental health, public health, all of that was in a state of flux. And I want to acknowledge at the same time what was going on in Massachusetts was Jerry Miller was in the midst of beginning to close prisons for kids. And I hoped he might be here with us today, but one of my longtime friends and colleagues, because if I wasn't doing corrections, I was working with youth services, was a man, Dr. Yitzhak Bakal, who worked with Jerry, who was the architect of closing the prisons and has been in Massachusetts as president of an organization, North American Family Institute. So I want to say there were people with Peter, who I give a lot of credit to. I give the governor a lot of credit. But there were other people who I would encourage you, especially younger people, being an old guy, a grandpa, who are the few, and I keep saying here, who are the future leaders who are going to make sure it may be abolition or at least there's real change in the system. We had a group of people who had made a choice in 1971 to be part of a reform of the corrections, of youth services, mental health, public health. There was a man, Gary Robinson. Gary lived in Roxbury. He ran an organization called OIC, which was doing vocational training, primarily in the Black community. In 1971, it wasn't possible for a lot of young Black men and women to get the kind of training and get able to create all kinds of interesting new jobs. Gary was the guy who put that together in Roxbury, and Peter made him the assistant cabinet secretary for program development. He's the guy who was the architect for work release, all the community corrections, everything that John began to put in place for the Department of Corrections. Gary was a leader. There was another woman, she sat next to me at my desk. I'll never forget her. She helped me live here in Boston because I had no idea how to deal with kind of the elite world, and she told me the language. Her name was Jane Hughes, and her assignment was to change the parole board. And she was incredible. Paul Chernoff, who I'm honored to know, became parole board chairman, but she was the person who did all the work to find new people. And I've said the story when the then chairman of the parole board came in front of her. She was my age, 26. He said, Jane, I'll be looking at all of the candidates you may have, and I'll approve them. And she looked at him and said, no, I don't think that's going to be necessary. And in the end, he had supported the old system. And we were fortunate, with Jane's help, to create a parole board that was led by Paul Chernoff. There were other people, a man, Larry Solomon. People said, did John have the internal management? Larry was the deputy commissioner of classification. He was a background as a psychologist. He knew what it was all about. But people were frightened even to have the idea of that kind of expertise. One of the stories that comes up is that John had helped an ex-Jesuit get out of Terre Haute prison. John was the first, not only the first Black commissioner of corrections, he was the first Black social worker in the Federal Bureau of Prison. He went to Morehouse. Dr. Mays, who had influence over Dr. King, John knew was a part of that world. John's brother was a civil rights leader in the South. Turned out Bill Farmer was the inmate. He freaked out. He had been a Jesuit. And he freaked out and got in some trouble, ended up in prison, and he was an inmate who was one of the only ones who would work with John. And John helped him on parole, and then Bill came here to Massachusetts as John's assistant. And finally, there was a lawyer, Van Langton, who worked in human services. I think Van has become a rabbi, and there was a whole group of people who were making a commitment to change and support the prison system and support ideas, or as you say here, ideas, about something like the NPRA. And I think that John was able to build a team of people, and his leadership certainly influenced my life, but I think he had influence in the midst of, as people have said, an incredibly racist environment, an environment that was beyond anything I hope anyone ever has to experience. But I would say for me, John was a leader, and he allowed all of us to do a job that was very challenging in the midst of a very, very difficult environment. And I'll give you the simplest, and then I'll stop in the midst of this. I had a theory, because it's Friday afternoon, about this time on Friday afternoons, I had a theory. It was called the grapefruit theory. This is how life was for John and all of us trying with reform. The grapefruit theory was this. In 1971, orange juice, I think, Jay, may have been 25 cents. You'd go up to the orange juice machine. You want a glass of orange juice. You'd put your quarter in, put your glass down to get a glass of orange juice, and a grapefruit would come in the window and hit you in the head. We got a lot of grapefruits in the head. But we were able, and I appreciate Bobby, to move forward on some real community corrections reform that hadn't been done anywhere in the country.
Thank you, Jim. So we've heard about the NPRA's mission to transform prisons, close them down, hold guards accountable. You've heard about this landscape of reform being pushed from the inside out, from groups of people who were committed to this new paradigm called community corrections. And we've heard a lot about this figure, Commissioner John Boone, who seems to be looming large over all of this development. So let's dig in a little bit deeper to talk about his legacy and his role in all of this. And for that, I'd like to turn to you, Paul, since, as Jim mentioned, you worked very closely with Commissioner Boone. And you actually wrote an essay about his personal impact on your professional and personal life, as well as his larger role in reforming prisons in Massachusetts. And you mentioned in one of those essays, quote, that throughout the country, it was understood that corrections commissioners arrive as heroes and leave as bums. And you suggested that in Commissioner Boone's case, he got the worst end of the stick in the aftermath of the Walpole prison takeover. So could you explain for us why this was the case? And in your opinion, what role did racism play in shaping Commissioner Boone's life and legacy as a leader of the Massachusetts DOC?
All right, first I was just going to tell you how I met Commissioner Boone, if I can do that. That's to me, it's very important. I met John Boone about 2 years before he came to Massachusetts. And I got to know him because I was suing him. And so that's a very special relationship that you develop with somebody whom you're suing, because, you know, when you sue somebody, somebody who's being sued in a civil suit, number one, the average person isn't exactly crazy about it. Number two, they feel very defensive. And three, they feel self-righteous. I know, as an agency head, I was sued. I was that average person. So I sued John Boone. I was a public defender in Washington, D.C. Too many of my clients had ended up in custody, and as with a number of the other public defenders. And we brought civil actions against the District of Columbia Jail, which was an absolute hellhole, and against the Lorton reformatories, which were not hellholes, but certainly needed some work. And so these were civil rights actions that were brought against those the individuals who ran those programs. The warden of the jail was typical person, I think more defensive and really a horrible person to sue. And so I met with him for the first time at the start of the lawsuit. And then a couple days later, I met with John Boone, figuring that, my goodness, he's probably going to be something like this guy who's running the jail. And you know, to this day, I remember the day when I met John Boone. We walked in, and he thanked us for the lawsuit. I said, what? And he says, yes. He says, what I want to do is to work with you and to use this lawsuit as a mechanism for getting what we need in order to do what you're suing us over. And that's exactly what it was from day one. It was like suing a colleague. And he used everything that we did to try to go to the District of Columbia committees, and it was actually the U.S. Congressional Committee, and he was able to do it. He was able to get resource after resource after resource using the lawsuit for that. And I've never seen... That hadn't happened before. I've never seen anything like that happen since, because John Boone was not your average person, not your average defendant, certainly, and not your average individual. He just really, I just can't tell you how much he took over so much of my professional life at that time. I figure I have to say this before I get into this other thing, and that is that within the 2-year period of time that I got to know him before he came to Massachusetts, he and I together worked with the Bar Association, and we created a program called Lawyers to Lorton. And we brought volunteer lawyers from the District of Columbia out to Lorton a couple of nights a week to work with prisoners and their families and to represent them. And that was, much of that was John's doing. John was bringing incarcerated people into Washington, D.C. to go to the Federal City College, which is like a equivalent to a community college here. And the faculty there was really awful. And so what does John do? He gets me to get people to come out for free to the college to teach. And it was easy to do. I mean, there's no big deal to get people, but it was a big deal for them. And that was John Boone's doing. And then right before he came here, he was instrumental in putting together something that was known as the Shenandoah Conference, which brought together judges, lawyers, prosecutors, probation officers, parole officers, and put us all together in a place called Shenandoah, Virginia for, it was over a week. And then part of the thing was that John Boone wanted all of us to serve a little time to see what a prison actually looks like and get to know people. So he really locked us all up for about 3 days in different places. And that's where I really got to see people who knew John Boone in that capacity. I got to see officers, I got to see regular other staff people, inmates in the institution. It was quite something. Anyway, so that was my background with him. I really do believe that what happens with with commissioners of correction is that they get recruited, they come in, and they get initial support, maybe for a day, and then after that it's all downhill, because I think what happens is they get eaten away from both the left and the right. John mainly was from the right, but it's also from the left. You lose your ability to the goodwill that you have at the beginning, and everybody's aggrieved has problems with the correction commissioner. Everybody has problems with the parole board chairman. I can remember one time, because when I went onto the parole board, there was a big parole reform, out with the old. We went from a 5-member board to a 7-member board. It went from people who were quite conservative to a very liberal board, and we doubled the parole rate. We did a lot. We were able to do a lot of things. And I remember going to John Boone because he was always my mentor and advisor. And I told him once I went out to Cambridge. So here I was, the chairman of the parole board, and we were paroling people at twice the rate that had been done before. We were cutting people's parole eligibility on the 1/3, 2/3 law for tens and tens of people, and we were doing a lot, I thought, as far as community corrections was concerned. And I went out to a meeting in Cambridge with a group, and I thought I was going to be a rock star in that group, going out there to talk about parole with a group of people, and I didn't get such a good reception. And when I went back, I talked to John Boone, because he was probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I said, John, I can't understand it. Look at all this stuff that the parole board has done, not just me, but everyone else. Why is it that we don't please everybody? And he says, he says, you come in as a hero, and then you don't please either side, and little by little, those sides come towards the middle, and you get squeezed out. And that's how he felt about corrections. He thought that that in the end, you don't end up with many allies, and that certainly happened in John's case. And I think that happened. The next commissioner was Frank Hall, who also came in as a hero. I think he knew when to get out. He went to another state, and but I think that's the nature of the beast. It's a job that you can't please anyone, and it starts to take root, and you please fewer and fewer people, and you come in as a hero and you go out as a bum. Sorry, that's how it is.
Thank you, Paul. Bobby, I wanted to bring you back into this conversation about John Boone, and just to give us a little bit of an understanding of what it was like, to the extent that the NPRA had interactions with his administration. What do you remember of kind of his role as a Black commissioner and as a prison reformer?
Well, I was well aware of the racial situation in the prison, and here comes a Black commissioner of corrections. And like I said, the guards used to have KKK membership cards. I mean, it was really, really bad. And he kind of threw me off because you had to know him, you had to talk to him to say, wow, this is a different person. I ain't never met anybody like this, especially a Black guy. Whoa, hold on. Got old. And the thing that amazed me with him is he used to do everything we wanted him to do. And he was like on our side. And you had to join him. You didn't have a choice. So this guy is opening the doors, and then the guards reacted and went out on the strike. And like I said, the whole plot of that was to have a race riot and Boone take the heat for people getting killed. We would have another Attica, but in Massachusetts. But Boone, I had all the respect in the world for him because this was a guy, he was real. That was the main thing is, when he said something, it wasn't bullshit. This was a guy who was talking right out of his heart. It was interesting, we had clashes when these guys were setting things up. But let me back up just a bit. 96% of the population voted for NPRA to represent the prisoners. When we did that vote, it was impossible to fudge it. When you came in and put your little thing in there, a seal was put, tape was put over the hole, and 5 guards, 5 prisoners, 5 administrators watched this. And they watched everybody, and one table had all boxes that were taped. Then they took the boxes one at a time, opened it up, took out a note, and showed everybody who it was choosing. There was no way to fudge this election. 3 months later, they said, we rigged the election, we forced people to do this and that, and it was just, the whole world just caved in. And it was really disheartening because the potential, like when these guys came in, they were about doing a job that no one else was able to do, and we could work together. Then the thing with the guards, I'm not sure where in the administration the table turned. I mean, we had the situation in such control, And then, like, when you read this, you'll see the institution was using drugs to control the population. Some individuals were getting 80 milligrams of Adderall, which is speed, a day. And after a week or so on that, they were super paranoid. And that's where the violence was coming from, was the reaction from the drugs. There was another drug that they were giving out like candy, was called Towin, highly addictive. And the deputy would call down to the medics and say, I'm sending Dellelo down there, put him on Towin for 3 or 4 days. I'm getting rewarded. For what? For being a stool pigeon. And the system just folded in on itself. All the good stuff that these guys were trying to set up and do politically and administratively, wiped right out. But Boone, that was a character. And they thought they were going to get a race riot, and Boone was going to get blamed for the killing and what happened. And I as the chairman of the inmate council, I called everybody into the auditorium. And I told them, because there were some guards that we secretly could work with, because when they brought the drugs in, you know, it's hard to go back there and then explain to you insanity. When you're looking at the correctional system, if you look at it as a logical, rational person, you lost. It was an insane asylum. And I got to separate these guys from the regular administration. They weren't the same thing. They were like working against each other, and I was on his side. I think I might have said one time about wrapping a pipe around your head.
That was a loving comment.
No, but I mean, it's an insane asylum. Like, the things that were happening, you put drug dealers and drug addicts in the same cell block, and you're wondering why people are dying and getting addicted. They put up in the visiting room could hold like 100 people. So they built 16 plexiglass little cages, and you talk to your visitor on the phone. They had to get that out of there real quick. You know why? Prisoners were overdosing. We didn't have visit contacts. How were they overdosing? Where was the drugs coming from? Where they always come from, the guards. You know, a woman can't bring in enough drugs that I can make a profit. A guard could bring in a Marlboro box that was full of heroin. You know what kind of money you're talking about? And this was the danger. People were getting killed because of nonsense. These guys here, had they succeeded, and they almost did, things would go, well, you saw the video, right? The attitude that the prisoners had, they were working, doing jobs. We were running a prison as prisoners successfully. Walpole was one of the most dangerous prisons in the country. We ran it for 12 weeks. Nobody got slapped, let alone killed. And we got in control of the prison. And it looked like we were going to be very successful. We had plans set up to take the canteen money and open up a house on the street, free release. We had so many great ideas. you could see the guy, the little committee we had with the group of individuals together, chewing out this and that, and presenting what they wanted done. It's amazing what we could have had. We had the duck that could lay the golden egg, and we killed it.
I want to make sure we have time to get Tony in on this conversation. I know, Tony, that you were not a part of the DOC when Commissioner Boone was in charge, but you were there in the immediate aftermath. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience and what are some of the lessons that you think we should take away from what worked and what didn't with the Walpole prison takeover?
Well, first, thanks for inviting me. I have to say that, like Bobby, this is, you get a sort of like flashbacks, and it's something that I've kind of tried to push somewhere else. I would say that my experience in working in Walpole sort of primed me to do additional work, with people who are incarcerated. Walpole, as Bobby said, was insane. So the first time I came to Walpole to work, I went into B block. And so there must have been a major problem there because the inmates were throwing feces, right, at the guards. And so the place it smelled bad, it looked bad, and they wanted us to come in and clean it up. And obviously I was protesting it, right? But what I found was I had more respect for those who were there that were incarcerated than I had for the guards. And I met some very interesting people. Ron Stokes was there, Ralph Hamm was there, Brother Keys was there for a while. I worked in maximum security B block, and then for a while I worked in minimum security. And at a minute I worked in the departmental segregation unit for a while. I was only there for a short time, and I remember from '77, I think, in '78 when we had the big blizzard. And so one of the things was they wanted me to stay, overnight because of blizzard. And I said, the difference is between me and the folks here, they stay and I go home and I'm going home. And I think that might have been my last day. And the other part was that there was someone who was in protective custody, and he was complaining that a spider was biting his private parts. And so that night, we came in the morning, there was a big fire. I guess he was trying to burn the spider, and, it was a big thing. And so they wanted me to go into the work in departmental protective custody. But the rule is that you have two correctional officers go in there, and they want to send me there by myself. And I said, I'm not going in there, right? I'm not going in there. And part of the problem was there was a petition for the guards who wanted new uniforms. And they wanted me to sign the petition. And I said, well, I'll sign that petition when you sign my petition that I get equal pay. And one of the guards said, he says, Walpole is a dangerous place to work in. And I said, are you threatening me? And so that led up to me, leaving there. I remember working in B block, and there was a lockdown. And this is to Bobby's point, and they were looking for drugs, right? And I don't know how it's possible for someone to have like a fish tank in prison in maximum security. And he had like a little mouse, and he was playing with the mouse and everything. I mean, this something comes out of a movie or something, right? And so when the guards came in, versus checking, they just dump all of that, flushed it. And so my theory was that's what the drugs was, right? So you're right, is that the guards were, involved in the drug trafficking. In fact, whether I was in maximum or minimum security, I seen guys go into a room and come out high as all hell, right? And I was like, there's more drugs here than it's in Roxbury. And I remember when we first had orientation, I think it was Butterfield. Butterworth, okay. The same thing. Field Worth. It was butter, but it wasn't. So margarine, right, not parquet, right. So they did orientation. They were showing us some films. They said, these guys are not your brother. Speaking to it was maybe a couple of black guys who went through the training with me. And then he showed us a picture of someone who was dead, who had been stabbed about 99 times. He said, see what happens, And so he says, in Walpole, it's to deal with custody, security, and control, and rehabilitation, and we don't believe in that. Right? So, obviously it was the structure that was designed to try to create the failure. It was like, we could bring you black guards in here, but, basically we're running the show. And this is how it's going to go. So, but, hearing Bobby's story and hearing your narratives and so forth, it speaks to the kind of authentic leadership that Boone represented. And it's something that's very missing, not just in the prison system, but throughout all of our institutions. And that we need to find a leadership and competent leadership and people who are capable to bring about the necessary transformation that is needed. Because as long as we have these institutions that continue to block change, we're going to continue to have more and more problems, in particular in prisons. I've been working around issues of restorative justice. I've gone to did some work in Concord and been working with a number of prisoners there. And there's a need for more support, and not just inside, but also outside. And there has to be a radical change in the prison system. Otherwise, we're going to be in more trouble than we realize that we're in. But also, I think that the question of restorative justice in the prison is that you have to also create that within communities. Because I know guys who are getting out, and when they go back into community, they're hiding out because of some of the harm that they created, and other people who are still around. It's a lot of, I won't say paranoia, but real sense of harm and going back. And that we have to create conditions in communities where we can engage in restorative justice practice just in communities, not just in terms of prison, but we have to support that. So hopefully we can learn from the Atticas, the Walpoles, but it's on all of us in terms of what society do we want, and what are we going to do, in terms of bringing about that change. When you talk, Bobby, about the role that, the prisoners have played, you're talking about bottom-up, kind of a leadership. And it's the same thing in our communities. If we're not trying to work with the people who mostly impacted in the things that are harming them, we're not going to create the transformation that we need. And so we have to examine what happened in Walpole. What were the successes? What were the failures? To figure out how we're going to make the next type of structural changes. But it's a political question. And it's the will of the people to make those changes. And if we don't do it, then we can complain, but we really can't complain because we didn't do anything to make a difference.
Thank you, Tony. Before we open things up for audience questions, I want to turn to our last topic for discussion, prison abolition. And I'll turn this over to you, Paul. You spent a lifetime working within the criminal legal system as a public defender, an organizer, parole board member, and as a justice on the Superior Court. So from your vantage point, what do you believe, and what have you seen to be the limits of police reform in America today? And why should we take prison abolition seriously in the age of mass incarceration?
What a question. I could be very honest and say I don't know the answer, because I really don't. But I think the political climate that we're facing today, and we look into the future as to what I think is going to be the political climate for the next several years, it's just not there to make the kinds of changes which I, in my heart, really feel ought to be there. And so I just try to be as practical as I can to try to at least improve what we have. Way back when, in the John Boone years, and Jim Isenberg, the Jim Isenberg years, we tried to improve what there was, and there was just so much to improve, and the ceiling was so high, I'm not sure that we could have done very much. I know that you asked me, and I should have hit that, I should have tried to address that point. You asked if John Boone was the victim of racism, and he was the victim of racism and parochialism, which was almost worse than the racism, because up until that time, Massachusetts, if you were in, it was very parochial. If you, law enforcement, including corrections and parole, was basically in the domain of the Irish. Public works with the Italians, mental health with the Jews. That's what sort of was. That was the parochialism. And so John Boone coming in as an outsider, so he's an outsider. Number two, he certainly wasn't Irish. He certainly wasn't Italian. He certainly wasn't Jewish. And it was those two things that came together. I only had one part of it. I mean, I was an outsider, but you know, the one thing that John had going for him, we don't have it now, was that Attica had just happened, and so there was a willingness to try to open things up at that particular time, but you know, it hasn't happened. It had never happened before. You wouldn't get a John Boone into the Department of Corrections, and it hasn't happened since. Before, I think it was because of Attica. You got a public defender from Washington, D.C. to come in to run the parole board. That hadn't happened before, and that hasn't happened since. There was this little opening at that particular time. Maybe it wasn't wide enough and didn't, but at least we all got away with a little bit.
Thank you, Paul. And then, Bobby, I wanted to turn the last prepared question to you, and then hopefully we have some questions in the audience. Prison abolitionists today have studied and will continue, we hope, to study what took place inside of Walpole 50 years ago. So what words of wisdom do you have to share with prison abolitionists today? And ultimately, what do you think people need to understand most about the prison abolition movement and its deep roots in 1970s struggles for prisoners' rights?
The problem with abolition, particularly in Massachusetts, is different groups that allege that they're about abolishing prisons are BS. They don't get together. We've met, I'd say at least 3 or 4 times. We got all the different groups and organizations together, usually at some church. And it's just so much BS. It's hard to explain it, that people got to get together. You know, sitting right now in this here group, and if you're different organizations, and it's rah, 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 sis, boom, bah, charge, right? You step outside the door, that went out the window. I was with certain organizations that were getting money to do different things for rehabilitation, and what was going on is they were building their organization. They weren't using the money to further the cause. We have to abolish the prison system, and we have to do it in a sane and rational manner. And we can do it. The problem is you can't just say, okay, we're going to let all these people go. The community be terrorized. I mean, there are dangerous people in the prison system, but that's a minor amount of the population. Most of the people in prison are there because of drug addiction. They lost control of their body. How do we abolish the prison system? We do it through attrition. We train prisoners to be carpenters, masons, electricians, teachers, get them certified, and they can run the prison system. Stop having the academy. You put 100 guards in academy, when they graduate, you don't tell them, we'll see you later, we'll give you a call. You give them a job. You're building the prison system as an irrational place with irrational people, and they lie so much. I mean, we had a vote where 96% of the prison population chose NPRA. I mean, we had the witnesses, the staff was there, the guards union was there, prisoners were there. 3 months later, they accused us of rigging the election. I mean, that was so much BS right there. And that was the problem. These guys were getting pushed out of the way. And where was this stuff coming from? It was political and very racial. The guards union was really after Boone. They wanted to get him out of there. They didn't want an N-word to be their boss. We have to abolish the prison system. We have to do it in a logical, rational manner. If we train prisoners and become professionals, hook them up with the union before they go out, give them a trade that they could earn a living. Stop the guards academy, stop it. When a guard retires, dies, or quits, don't replace him. The parole board, which we have the parole board man right there, if 300 people a month come into the prison system, you don't have a choice. You have to pick what 300 people you want to remove, or you have to build a new prison. And unfortunately, they went for new prisons. But if we do it the right way, I mean, there are people in there that belong in a mental institution, not a torture chamber, not a Bridgewater kind of place, but a place where, you know, it's amazing how many prisoners realize they can't go to the street and they don't want to go to the street. Julian Stone, I was working with him on his case, and it was getting ridiculous. Now, we had all the case law on the subject matter, and I had said to him, Julian, let's go, let's file the motion, you got it. And he said first in a real soft voice, Bobby, I don't want to go out. And I didn't really hear what he was saying. I said, what? He said, Bobby, I can't go to the street. Out there, I'll kill things. He says, in here, I have the control. So, well, hey, we got to do more research on this, that, and the other thing. And I've run into several situations where people told me, they trusted me, so they could tell me, listen, I can't go to the street. I can't control myself out there. In here, they keep me in control. Those are the individuals that need to get into a mental institution that's humane and compassionate. This is,
One quick point. Yeah, a number of those guards have been in mental institutions. You know, one of the things I wanted to mention is that when you know, we had a carpool of guards that would pick me up, and then we would leave. These guys were smoking weed and drinking, going to work, and leaving. And at one point, they got mad at me because I wasn't participating. They would say, we don't know who you are. We don't trust you. I said, I'm not going to kill myself because of what's happening in there, because of the stress and stuff. And that was the reality of that was going on. And these were the black guards, but you can see the segregation that was existing between the black guards and the white guards. But to me, that was so profound. That's like, man, you guys are pointing out folks who are getting high, and you high driving and leaving and drinking. I said, this is crazy. So it was insane, but I just wanted to add that part.
We only have a few more minutes left of the panel, so I want to make sure if folks have questions, we can get at least a couple in before 2:15.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ivy Moody. I work for the Mental Health Legal Advisors Committee, and we do systemic litigation on mental health and the overlap with the criminal system. And I just wanted to ask what your take is on a state like Massachusetts, where we have the smallest prison population, but we have one of the largest populations of people who are under the jurisdiction or under the supervision of a system, and the largest discrepancies between percentages of Black and Latinx people in our prisons versus in our communities. How do we get the Massachusetts population to take these issues seriously when they see themselves as, you know, the tower on the hill doing the best of the best liberal work in the country and ahead of everyone else when we know we're not, and there's all these atrocious things going on?
Great question. Who would like to take it first?
I don't know the specifics. I think the challenge at this time is, and I appreciate your question, is really looking carefully at what the reality is and looking at what the public messages might be, but looking at ways in which you might begin to offer some alternatives and raising those kinds of issues. From my 2-day experience here, one of the things that's amazing to me, frankly, is that on one hand, no one from the Massachusetts Department, at least I'm aware of, Massachusetts Department of Corrections is at this meeting. And, oh, you are here. Good. Okay, well, I congratulate you. The other issue I've been encouraging, and I appreciate, is I think one of the, hopefully, people walk out of here and say, what is the next generation of leadership that is willing to take on the challenges? Because I think there's a fair amount of incremental kind of step-by-step change in some ways. But I think stepping back and looking at the vision of what are these mental health, prisons, police, what is the vision and mission for them that overall meets the needs of real people in real communities? And I would suggest you might look at it that way.
It also might be timely that we have a brand-new governor at this point. Pardon? No, well, nevertheless, we have a new governor, and I know that there were some people, one person here I'm looking at right now who was attempting to get the governor to reinstate what has been non-existent over the last couple decades, and that's the Governor's Advisory Committee on Corrections, which takes good people in the community, brings them in, and educates the governor on some things that have to be done. Just a thought, is that going to change everything? No, but I think it's a direction.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Yes. So I'm concerned about the lack of people of color involved with the parole board. And I'm wondering if you all had some ideas about how we could marry community, lawyers, people like Mr. Isenberg and Mr. Dellelo together to try to funnel people from communities of color into the parole board.
You know, there are 5-year appointments, I think there's still 5-year appointments made by the governor, confirmed by the council. Once again, just find a mechanism for getting to the governor for recruiting of people of color for the board. When I was on the board, there was one person of color, and then another person, and then she became the chairperson of the board. But you're right; it's not over time. It certainly has not represented the population, and but that's something that's got to be done gradually, unless the last statutory. It's got to be done gradually because there's only one opening every year. That's why. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but the fundamental question, right, the fundamental question. Right, but the fundamental question is how do you begin to bring about structural change? That's the question, right? Otherwise, you're going to have gradualism, right? And unless you're able to create the kind of political climate that's going to force more rapid change, it's going to, in fact, things have, from this conversation, we're finding out things have gone way, way back, right? And so, and if we expect, politicians to just do it out of the goodwill of their heart, it's not going to happen, right?
We're almost out of time, actually. Excuse me, sir. I just want to make sure that we're going to be mindful of the time. It is almost 2:15. Okay, well, actually, I want to make sure. Sir, I'm sorry. I want to be respectful to make sure we have enough time before we open it up to the floor. We're almost out of time, sir. We're almost out of time. That's why. Okay, great. Please. No, go ahead, please.
I went into prison in 1981. It was after the tumultuous times of 1974. Dellelo knows about it. Jabir Pope, all these guys know about this shit. All right? I went into the prison system as a 17-year-old kid. All right? And these guys that are out here tonight, these gentlemen are the ones that taught me how to grow up in prison. They taught me how to be respectful, not to steal from somebody else's cell. Don't take coffee from nobody. Don't steal nothing. Be respectful. Go to school, get your GED. I went to BU in prison. I graduated from Boston University when I was inside. It was at the advice of fellow convicts who, listen, we don't need this system the way it is set up like this. We help each other out as prisoners. They come to you and tell you, hey, man, you want to survive your 10 years? I was doing a lifetime bit. I was doing a lifetime, natural life without parole. But guys coming in with 10 years, you tell the guy, listen, what do you want? You want to run around the yard and sell drugs and get high? Or do you want to go to school? And guess what? All these guys in here that are here today, look at my brother over here. I love you, brother. These are our teachers. These are the guys that teach people inside how to stay outside of prison. We keep having this conversation that goes around and around and around for fucking 50, 60, 70 years. We're living in a slave state. Slavery, we're in a slave state, right? We don't need this. We support each other. Convicts, Bobby, right? I wasn't there in 70. I was a fucking little kid, man. I was a little kid. But I remember growing up in Sharon and seeing three towns away from me, Walpole prison is rioting in 10 block. Okay? As a child, I saw that on the news. And you were one of those guys that were up there fighting for prisoners' rights. We know how to conduct ourselves. We need an opportunity. We need people, the court system, everybody to come out and give an opportunity to people to get on their feet.
Our problem is how do we educate the public?
You can't, because the
Well,
media.
but we have to find out a way of doing it.
And I can't stand the fucking bastard. Yeah. But the thing is,
But
right?
you can't educate the public. I want to disagree with you principally. You can educate the public. The question is how are you going to educate the public, right? Because if you don't do it, then you're going to isolate yourself in terms of being able to deal. That's the most difficult part, and we have to figure out how.
You're not isolating yourself when you got guys out here. We're not isolated. We're out here. And we're all coming out. There's more guys coming out.
So hang on one second. Why don't we take this moment And there's a lot of things that can be celebrated and learned from this experience. That's right, at least from 50 years. To me, one of the greatest forms of social control is cynicism.
Listen,
There's a
Walpole
lot,
was
hang on,
fucking
there's a
nut house.
lot of,
Walpole was a nut house.
no, but what Walpole, hang on.
They ran this prison like gentlemen.
Excuse, that's what I'm saying. There's something,
ran that prison
there's
like
something to take away from this experience of this last day and a half. You've got a number of people who are leaders who came out of that experience. You've got a picture, a vision of what could be happening in a positive way. The challenge becomes how all of us continue to see if we can mobilize support for that. I'll give an example. In New York, there's something called Grayston Bakery. They now have a business which they hire hundreds of people. There's no background checks. There's no question what's your background. Real, concrete things for jobs. So I hope you'll all leave here and be thinking about and collaborating where you can go learning about this positive experience that happened 50 years ago.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna tell you something, right?
Yeah.
I don't even have a job right now. I'm not working. I can't even pay my rent and my utilities. I'm gonna be on the street sleeping in my car soon. I'm on lifetime parole. I don't give a shit if they throw me back inside, to be honest with you, right? But I'm gonna tell you something, right? There's people out here coming out to the street, and their life is coming out here. And I'm gonna tell you something. Everybody deserves a place to live, whether you're a woman or a man. You're an ex-prisoner. Listen, close Framingham down. I don't even want to get into that. We've been doing campaigning for the past fucking several months. But that $50 million they want to spend on a new women's prison, they can stick that, right? I'm telling you right now, we're fighting against that. We've been doing door to door, right? They want to build a $20 million youth facility in Taunton for kids, to lock kids up while they're little kids, to already get them on the road to fucking adult prison, right? I'm just saying. I was 17 years old when I went in, and I'm gonna tell you something. God be damned, I met these guys inside who were abolitionists and fighters, and I'm pointing at them right now. And you know who they are, because they're all here tonight, right? And they taught me how to stand up and fight for what's right. And I've always been a fighter. In all my 37 years in the joint, I fought. And guess what? I got in trouble for it. You know what? I don't care. I got locked in the hole. I got thrown in segregation. I lost my single cell. I don't give a crap. Because you know what? I was fighting for what's right. And what's right now, close these prisons down, especially Framingham. Close it down, lock it down, and let's build up, let's bring people out in the community. Listen, everybody out here has something to contribute. We all have it. I have it, and I have nothing right now. No, I'm ready to jump in Charles River right now. But the thing is, like, we all have something to give, you know? Give us all a chance. Corey records, all these things, you can't get a job here, you can't work here. Come on, man. That ain't fair.
That's a really crucial note to end on or to pause on. Our final panel is coming up. For that panel, we're going to be bringing in the Reverend Ed Rodman, who was crucial to what happened at Walpole. We're going to be bringing in the voices of some individuals at Norfolk, who are part of MCI Norfolk, who are part of the African American Coalition Committee, to set up that tech. We actually have to clear this room for until 3 o'clock. So to set everything up and get those voices in this space, we need to get everyone to step outside. In the rotunda there.
Stay safe.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
This was the brother, after 30 years, a roommate of Cosby's, lying, guard, shackled to the bed with a guard in the room, put his hand. But beyond that, I wanted to piggyback on what Cosby said, and Shorty said, and Bobby said, and Greg said, and to talk about liberalism and the nonprofit industrial complex. And I don't mean it in a fucking positive way, because for all the people that I've known in 30 years and what I've learned, I never feel safer than when I'm in a room with the, oh, thank thank you, because I have been waiting. With these people, please, it's been 30 years. I have seen, this has been a very painful education. We haven't talked about colonialism and imperialism. There's a precursor of the racism that puts everybody inside. I have seen violence, and if they're working class, the guards, violence beyond measure that I still can't comprehend after 30 years. But I will also say that for all those people that do that violence, the people that I have the most antipathy for, and people have heard me say it before, are the gatekeepers, the liberal women missionaries, the carceral feminists, the people that get grant money and shut you down. I am barred from every prison because, you know, I look very sexually inappropriate right now. And my brother was blind, he couldn't see me anyway. But, and I'm going to name a few of them, so please think about it. That's who silences us. When we wrote a moratorium bill in 2007, when we were fighting the Chicopee Women's Jail, who was for it? Prisoner Legal Services was for it. Leslie Walker was in love with the sheriff, with the state police. ACLU, do you think they'll say a word when our newsletters are banned? Those three, well, Kathy Dennehy, the commissioner, Leslie Walker, and Carol Rose of the ACLU traveled together on a circuit to talk about how to put it through the 3 strikes bill. That's who our enemies are. I'm a working class feminist, but when I say carceral feminist, I'm talking about a certain class of people that go to school, that get grants and funds to do this stuff, and they're adding more and more and more. Diversion is diversification. They're expanding. The same terrible things happen to restorative justice in Massachusetts with some of the legislation because a police public relations, John Guilfoyle, wrote some of that, and they're adding it to the prisoners, not in the community, but adding it. So I just wanted to say that that makes me so, so bitter. I'm a very, very bitter person. I have seen incredible violence with a pen and by the guards. My brother had to have his fingers amputated because they would bend them back so much he's blind. Pushed off the sidewalk, assaulted, put in the hole for 250 days after he was attacked. It's not an anomaly. It was just my education. So I guess I'm asking, kind of late, I'm sorry. What the role of liberalism in the expansion of the prison industrial complex? Thank you.
Anyone wants to give a quick response to that? I don't know if that's possible, but I want to thank everybody for participating in this discussion, for this conversation. I want to thank our panelists and our moderator, DeAnza Cook. And please join us very soon back in this room at 3 o'clock.